right. I think this thing's on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining us again for another episode, I guess we call it, of the .NET Doc Show. And here, I saw a few questions in the chat what this is about. It's 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. And as doctors of .NET, prescribe healthy choices in .NET and .NET only. So I'm your host, Luis, and joining me are all these fine folks, my co-hosts, David Pine and Cam Silver. And we have a special guest here, Irina, joining us to talk a little bit about REST in .NET.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Here is 7 p.m.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. 7 p.m., that is very commendable. It's 11 a.m. where I live. So I'm out of bed and prepped and ready and excited for today's show. So why don't you tell the world a little bit about yourself?
My name is Irina. I'm from Romania, Central Eastern Europe. I'm a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies, and I'm passionate about everything .NET. And fortunately, we have a lot to be passionate about in .NET. Not only lately, but we have some cool things going on. And I have a user group that I'm trying to drive along with my colleague, and I also organize a conference. But pretty much my heart is in the community and all about community.
Wow, that's amazing.
And also, I am a software architect because I also work, not only taking care of communities. And again, playing with .NET.
Well, so what, you didn't say, what conference do you organize?
It's called .NET Days, Romania. Yeah, we thought that we want to bring you guys over in Romania because we always travel for conferences, and we said that's a good opportunity to make people know us here in Iași, where I am. And we had a super nice audience this year. Before COVID, we were, I think, the last conference in person around Romania. And we were super lucky. It was at the end of February, and COVID started to rise up at that moment. But we were pretty lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. So for future reference, Cam, Luis, and myself, we all love speaking at conferences. So if ever
Why do you think I brought this up?
If ever you want speakers, I'm just saying, reach out, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Should we jump into our checkup doc, you think? Let's do it. Let's do it. We're waiting. Cam's pressing buttons.
No, I died. My window there is black.
We were just asking you, the person behind the curtain, to go to the checkup doc, and then you got to.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know how to get rid of the other Kim because he's logged in as a host, so I'm logged in twice now. Wait, there. There we go. So yes, we're gonna go to the checkup, and while the little bumper is playing, I'm gonna fix my demo.
So a testament to being live and unscripted, right?
Yeah, we are exactly what we said. And I had to, I had the document open, and I had to close all my browser windows because what happened was my browser process locked up. And so I am recovering. So bear in mind that this is live and unscripted. So this week's doc is test web APIs with the HTTP REPL. This is a cool tool that if anybody knows Brady Gaster was actually asking us to maybe feature this, and as it turns out, Irina's visit to the show is a great opportunity. This thing just went GA. This tool, this HTTP REPL tool, is it's like a replacement for curl. Like if you ever use curl or wget or even Postman for that matter, Postman's got this big GUI. I know I prefer command line tools when I'm doing quick and dirty API tests. That's where the HTTP REPL comes in. So I had my demo actually all prepared. I had a Visual Studio window. Where is it? Because I went.
Everything. The world died.
The world died. Here it is. So I have an API that I just started running. There's the Swagger for it. So we have.
Well, wait, real quick, Cam. What's
Sure.
Swagger? What is that?
So Swagger is this really cool little. Swagger specifically is the specification. What do we call it? Standard format. What would the word be here? But it defines the how we define a API, an open API. It's the equivalent to, remember, like web services back in the days, we had WSDL that defined what that. This is like that, but for REST, right?
Awesome.
So it defines what services this REST endpoint offers. So in .NET 5, Web API now has, like, by default, the swashbuckle package is added in, which gives you Swagger. By default, you file, new project, Web API, you have Swagger. So here's the Swagger for my API. I've got 2 endpoints in it, two controllers. I have a products controller and the default weather forecast controller. So this is cool. So I'm going to connect to it. HTTP REPL localhost 5001. So this is the part I want to point out. So this is what makes it better than curl or wget or anything like that. When it connected to the endpoint, it went and checked to see if it had a Swagger. And sure enough, it does. Here's the open API description at that Swagger address. So now I can do like a directory listing. Oops, ls. And there are my 2 controllers. So now I can go into products, and there are what I can do within the products controller. I can get and post, or I can get, put, and delete by ID, right? So let's do a get. So there are all my products.
Wow.
Right?
That's cool.
So let's say I just wanted to get 1, get 2. So there's just one of them. And that's basically what it is. It's a command line interface for REST APIs.
Wow, that's awesome.
So we actually have a question here from TofuLock, which is, do I need to install HTTP REPL, or does it come with the .NET 5 SDK?
That's a great question. So it is a .NET global tool. So hit up this doc. I'm going to run the banner again, aka.ms/http-repl-doc. Hit up this doc. This is all you have to do to install it. At the command line, just run .NET tool install -g and then the package name, and then you've got it.
Amazing. That's awesome. I'm going to have to definitely try that out myself because I've been slacking a bit. Should we jump over now into the hallway track?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So in the hallway track, the idea here, this segment is really to encourage engagement and participation from the beloved developer community that we're hosting today. We have lots of viewers live right now, so feel free to ask questions. But we're just going to have an open circle kind of hallway track, virtually, right? Where we're going to have technical conversation talking with Irina about HTTP REST and all sorts of fun stuff there. So let's do it.
I'm still processing HTTP REPL. I mean, it's great. I use curl on Linux, and it's ugly. But
so this particular tool is a lot of our other co-host on this one of our other co-hosts on the show, Scott Addy. He and I have done a lot of these Microsoft Learn modules, and one of the ones that we've been working on revisiting and updating is there's a Microsoft Learn module out there for learning Web API, and it's like the bare minimum. We're going to teach you, like the basics of how to do the 4 basic REST verbs with a Web API. It's all interactive in the browser, and we have the users use curl to test it, in the browser, and we've been reworking it to use the HTTP REPL instead. It's not there yet. It will be soon, but that's really where it came from. It's a way better tool than curl for those.
So there was a question here I want to get to real quick. Dick Baker says, you mentioned WSDL, but does OpenAPI, aka Swagger Swashbuckle, generate any hard copy report of all the GET, POST, etc. request responses? So that's actually literally what OpenAPI is. It's a definition that will allow you to express your API endpoints, the contracts between those. So literally, it's the same idea of WSDL, where you're basically, it's the advancement of it now. So it's focused on REST, but it is 100% that. And
so I just want to point out that the what we're looking at here in the browser is running as part of my app. This is an endpoint that you can go to in the browser that shows you, all of the different operations you can carry out with this API, and you can even carry them out like right there in the browser. I can hit get right there, and it says, okay, so here's what that request, what that response looks like. I'm going to zoom in a little. This is what the response looks like. You can expect like a 200 if it's successful. You're going to get a package that looks like that, a payload that looks like that, and then you can try it out right here in the browser. We can just say, okay, execute. And here is the response right there from the app. And this is, you said hard copy. I presume you could print this. What does this look like if we print it? I wonder if it has a print view. I wonder if somebody thought that through. Let's find out.
I think he means hard copy is more or less like the contracts, like what the WSDL would do, because the WSDL, it actually generate code for you, right? And all those things. Yeah. And that's the idea behind the open API.
Sure.
So I'm actually really curious, and I guess to drive the conversation a bit, the title really caught my attention, Irina, where you said the ignored parts of REST. So I'm curious, what parts did we ignore, and how can we elaborate on those?
Oh, where should I start? I think now REST is more confused to HTTP or JSON over HTTP.
Yes.
Because it's somehow implicit. If you do an API, what kind of API are you doing? Well, it's REST. But not all APIs that run over HTTP and over web API are implicit REST.
Right.
And the part that we are ignoring is basically the underlying protocol, the HTTP, the correct usage and leveraging of HTTP with everything that is HTTP. The right status codes, headers, hypermedia types, pretty much everything that we should use from HTTP and in REST.
Yeah.
And this confusion, I'm in a way trying to solve. If you have an API that is web API, you're not having necessarily a REST API. And it's a term that it's used too much, but we're not having REST API.
So by way of an example, like one of my home automation systems I have here in the house, they have exposed an API and they call it a REST API, but everything in the API, everything is GET, the whole thing. There are no posts, there are no puts, there are no updates. It is all GET. You want to turn this switch on over here, here's a GET statement for it. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about? Or?
Oh yeah. Okay. And even the endpoint naming has a small implication in what REST means. I mean, if you have the verb in the URL, like get all lights in the house, you shouldn't have that in the endpoint. Maybe you should think about, hey, /lights and use the proper verb to make the request.
So I have to respond to the comment we just got from Chris. He says, does it respond to a status code 418? I think that's the I'm a little teapot. Is that? Yeah.
Oh God.
Wait,
no, this is
payment needed. Is not payment needed.
Oh yeah, I don't know. That 418. If you're seeing this, Chris, elaborate on what a 418 is, so we don't have to Google it. I'm a teapot. He says, okay, perfect. That's amazing.
No, it's 418. Yeah, 418 is I'm a teapot.
I mean, there are 63 status codes. We cannot know everything by heart, but at least the most common ones.
I'm amazed that I'm amazed that you know the number of status codes. I
studied.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's a really good point though. Like I had never really thought about it that way. We sit on top of all these platforms and we build things and we kind of get into, click wizardry where we're clicking along and accepting templates and not fully understanding necessarily some of the abstractions, some of the underlying mechanics. And I think Scott Hanselman said it best years ago, where he talked about the best place to learn is to go one level beneath where you are currently. And then once you understand some of those core technologies, you'll be better and more fulfilled, so to speak, right? So I think this is a great conversation. So what are some of the correct verbs to always use, and how do you associate endpoints to collections, and what are some of the parameters that are required? And let's talk to some of that.
Usually when, at least when I started to dig deeper into what REST should mean, I found out that, hey, you need a single endpoint pretty much for every resource that you're trying to represent. So you'll have the endpoint that represents the collection, and then you have the possibility to use a get, right, to get all in the collection and to page that collection and everything. You can use a post to add a new resource to your collection, and that's a single endpoint. And you can use two verbs to obtain two different things. And another endpoint is that the one with /ID, which is pretty much a convention, but it will allow you to get that resource, to update the resource, and delete the resource. And you have create, read, update, delete with two endpoints. And I don't know if you remember the old times with SOAP and everything that was a different operation. It wasn't nice to watch and write and call.
I do remember those days. And I remember now also that, the advancements of these protocols are ever marching forward. And to that end, we've got now, in addition to WSDL SOAP-based things, XML historically, but, the prevalence of JavaScript and JavaScript object notation, JSON, and then that's being commonly associated now with REST API endpoints. But now we have also GraphQL and the way to kind of express the result set of what you're querying in the first place, and just having one endpoint. So what is
with the post?
Yeah, right, with the post. So what's the right, do you still think REST is, I don't think REST is going anywhere, but do you think REST is always the right tool for the job, or when is it, when should you choose one or the other?
For sure not. But it does the job. It has proven results. But we as developers, I think we kind of fail to understand what a REST is, because we're always in a hurry to develop functionalities, and we do not have time to investigate and to understand what's below the surface. I think REST is here to stay. And I think GraphQL appeared in response because, well, the company that invented GraphQL had the specific reason to invent GraphQL. But now when I hear developers that are complaining, hey, I'm not using REST because look at GraphQL, look at how cool it is. You have exact fetching, no underfetching, no overfetching. It's exactly what you want. I tend to stay a bit and say, hey, do you have a real REST API, or you have something that mimics the REST API?
Right,
I mean, having two endpoints, it's true. When you have a REST API, you need to always design and redesign your APIs, because depending on if you, own the client app or not, you have the leverage of trimming constantly your API. If you have fields that are sent in the responses that are not used by the clients, then you need to remove those and so on. And there is a constant design work around REST APIs, but I do not think that GraphQL is somehow superior to REST.
It's just another tool, right?
It's not exactly, yeah.
So Chris is saying that one of his pet peeves here is a post to an API book 1, which is the ID, right? The one, and a delete endpoint. So clearly that the correct verb would be a delete in this case, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So is this kind of what you're alluding to where there's some sort of underlying mechanics that
No.
aren't necessarily-
Sorry. I just saw this on the screen. API book 1/delete. No, that shouldn't happen. The resource that you're talking about is pretty much the book.
Right.
And you kind of should have API/books because it's a collection, and the resource that you're trying to represent is a collection.
Okay.
/1 is the idea of the collection. You need to look at endpoints in a hierarchical manner. Okay, it's books is the resource, and you go deeper. You have the book by ID, and the delete should be the verb that you're using to delete that resource that is represented in the endpoint.
So the correct way to write that would be a delete verb for an API books 1.
Exactly. In my opinion, yes. At least the verb that you should use shouldn't appear in the endpoint, because there's a saying that cool URIs don't change. And you change the URI every time you need to do a different operation on the endpoint.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So based on everything we've been sort of chatting about and getting a little bit more into the .NET side of things and thinking about these things in a hierarchical manner, right? How are these things different from using a web API using MVC?
It's not about being different. It's about how you represent your resources, your data, in a way, to the outside world. Each endpoint should be self-explanatory. We have Swagger. Thanks God for that. It's super nice. But you shouldn't need a manual just to navigate through an API and to figure it out. Okay, I have this endpoint. What does it do? What are the operations that it supports?
Well, and I was just going to say, I think in regards to that question that Luis just brought up, how different is MVC versus REST? I feel like MVC is really just working with REST with HTML documents being the resources that you're retrieving, right?
Yeah.
Or actually, it should be better phrased as HTML representations of the resources being what you're retrieving.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there is no problem if you have a web API and a REST API, and you put an MVC in front of it. I mean, what you use behind the scene pretty much are resources. Either are represented are JSON, XML, if that's the case, or HTML. But the resources are the same. You're working with books, for example.
Right.
That's a really interesting thing, because I think there's actually a lot of misconception about MVC holistically as it compares to web API, and there was some ambiguity that existed with the way the controllers were written in .NET, to be quite frank, and they had consolidated them a while ago, and then they separated them again. So there's like this contention kind of going back and forth. But to be clear, MVC is still essentially just endpoints that return HTML.
Exactly.
Right.
Or otherwise, in a different manner of speaking, I can say that MVC is just a web API, but with an extra layer, the presentation layer, in which you decide how you display the data.
Absolutely.
You have in MVC also the front end.
And apparently Visual Studio is getting silly here. They have if a collection of teapot exists, but not one for an ID of 3, should API teapots 3 return status code 418? Oh God.
Good one. A 404 should be better.
Yeah, that'd be more accurate, right?
Yeah. And also, if we're talking about requests and responses, each of those should be, if you look at the request, their body, header, and so on, you should be able to tell what you'll get back, depending on the headers that you're sending in the request. And for the server side, each request should be understood in isolation without extra traces. So that's why we need to leverage everything in HTTP.
So you're just backing up just a second when you said the request. So everything you need to know. Can you say that one more time? You said everything in the request. How did you phrase that?
So each request should be self-contained, to put it in other words. I mean, everything that you want from the client's perspective in that request should be contained in the request. There shouldn't be any trace with the previous request or the next request and so on. And when the server receives that request, the server should be able to decipher it and say, hey, look what this client wants. This client wants this representation of the resource in this format, and so on and so forth.
Chris was saying what was on my mind here. Stateless is what you're talking about. Stateless. HTTP is a stateless protocol.
Exactly. And the rest promotes statelessness.
Perfect. Awesome. We did have a question here I wanted to throw up. So Samir is asking, what is the difference to GRPC and when to use it over REST?
This is a very good question. The underlying protocol for gRPC and REST is HTTP. Either it's HTTP 1 or HTTP 2, it's still HTTP. But REST is more resource-oriented, and gRPC is more developer-ish oriented. Because in gRPC, you are not doing the requests in the classical manner. You're just calling code as if that code is in the same application.
Interesting. So then I guess one thing is also true. A lot of people really associate gRPC with being like a binary protocol. You can also have binary bits that go over the wire with REST as well, right? It's all how you configure.
Yeah. It's a different representation. You can say what representation you expect by using the accept header. And this way, the content negotiation that happens with every request on Web API, the server will be able to tell, hey, this client wants a binary representation of this resource, and this client wants JSON representation of that resource.
Awesome. So do you have any code you'd like to show us, and we can talk through some of that, or any slides or any other things on your desktop that are captivating?
I don't know if captivating, but I can show you something.
We all love talking about REST and HTTP and lower level protocols. It's exciting. While you're pulling that up, we did have a question here I'm going to pull up real quick. Why is from query attribute not maps immutable classes? I'm not sure I understand that question fully. So the attribute itself is an attribute that's known to be present with some of the APIs. So basically what that does, the from query attribute can be used on an action endpoint or an API endpoint. And what it does is it will basically identify part of the route as a deserialized object or type. So for example, if you have a route that has an ID as part of the parameters, you can say from query, and then the ID parameter into your action will be deserialized as such. I'm not sure if it does classes at all, though. Typically, it's just, I guess, more common for individual, values. So it's, and those are just like C# parameters on anything else. But that's, feel free to elaborate a little bit more, and we can jump back into that one.
Yeah, and you can probably take those values, right? If you wanted to then create an immutable class after the fact, once you capture those values, that's certainly possible. I don't see why that wouldn't be an option either. But as you said, right, it's more focused on the parameters rather than what the actual object itself may be.
And can we increase the font size a bit?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I think that's too much.
That's better.
Let's see. In fact, what I wanted to show is, first of all, the structure of the project. It's a super easy dummy application, web API. It's an API with a data and domain, because this is how I often like to organize code. The domain project will contain the entities that are generated by Entity Framework or not. But in data, I have repositories, super easy, calling to database, getting things back and forth, and so on. And in the API, I have a list of controllers, as we all know. And in here, I want to show you how many things we can do inside a single controller that are mapping to the REST guide. So let's see, an options. we often have clients written Angular, Vue.js, or React, or so on, that are making HTTP options call towards our API. And I'm not using HTTP REPL because I just learned about it, but I'm using good old Postman. But well, I'm gonna switch my my approach.
No, it's better for a visual. This is perfect to show people all the inner workings. I don't think the REPL really serves that great of an illustration for exposing all the ins and outs. I think actually Postman does a better job at really, for me at least, when I started using Postman, it really let me realize, again, going back to that lower, like one level lower, like I kind of opened my eyes to like how the HTTP protocol actually works, how there's headers and authorization and the parameters, and how all of it is really kind of put together for just a simple endpoint. A lot of moving parts that you don't necessarily realize, and this paints a great picture.
So before we dive into the actual demo, we have a question here from Ricardo Coelho. Is there any particular reason why you create class libraries for the data access layer and repository rather than just using folders?
I personally prefer to have it that way because I often, when I'm doing my demo, I have an API and I'm reusing the data and the domain. And then I maybe add an MVC app in front of it and I reuse the two layers. That's the only reason that I personally do that. But I've seen people that are developing microservices and they just have folders for every layer, as they consider it, layer.
Yeah.
In the app. It's nothing wrong with folders.
I've seen both ways as well. And I think it just becomes a matter of group opinion, right? Whoever the developers are that are maintaining it and kind of their preference.
So I apologize. I wasn't even really clear on the distinction of the question. Was there something different about the way Irina had her code arranged?
She has a domain. Sorry, go ahead.
I have two class libraries, data and domain.
Oh, okay.
And not folders.
Oh, okay. I got you now.
It's a matter of habit, I think, and preference. Nothing bad. But if you want to reuse these two, then it's easier when you have it in class libraries than in folders.
We've got a really good question here. This is probably one of the ignored parts. I don't often see this, but I'm happy that you actually have them covered here. They want to see basically the head and options verb. I've never actually used them before. I've known that they existed. Those are definitely ignored parts for me. So thank you, first of all, for asking this question. And thank you, Irina, for actually having code samples with it in there.
So it's so easy in Web API to go towards more REST as it should be, but just by simply decorating your actions with attributes that are representing verbs.
So I don't mean to cut you off. Are you going to show us how that particular action method, what that does? Because I have no idea.
So in terms of code, I think you have only one HTTP option per controller. That's the limit, I think. But what you should do in an HTTP options is to tell the client what are the allowed verbs to use on that specific endpoint. So when you're calling with HTTP options, you're like saying, hey, server, what are my options here on this endpoint? So you're basically adding the allow header with all the possibilities. So in my controller, I have a get, an options, and a post.
That's amazing. I never knew that. And that makes me just think to myself that there should probably be someone writing right now a C# code generator that will look at your controller endpoint and automatically write this code for you that says you have these headers or these HTTP get, you have HTTP. Oh, well, you have a head here though. So should you also specify a head as an options, or is that a different thing altogether?
I should also have the head, but I kind of separated them as easier to follow. But one thing to note here in HTTP options, if you have a client that is written like a client app and the web API, the client app will do an HTTP options by default, and the web API will respond with something.
Okay.
Frankly, I never dug deeper in that. But in terms of having control from the API, because the server should be the one that drives the application state altogether and REST, you should be able to add what it's allowed or not here. And the client should listen, hey, I'm allowed only to do this kind of requests.
So you like being explicit rather than assuming something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But now if I go in Postman and I add the breakpoint here, and I'm trying to find my options. So I have an API speakers because the speakers are my resources. And that's the collection speakers. Now there's no need to name with plural or not. It's a matter of preference, but I think it's more obvious. Hey, I have speakers like several of them.
That's the way I tend to do it as well. Since it's a collection, I always think of it as plural.
Me too.
But I've actually seen, so I'm curious your thoughts on this. So you mentioned you can do either or, and it's kind of your preference. I've seen people do for like the get, they'll do speakers plural because there's multiple. But then when you dive into an individual one, like, a further route deeper where you have to identify, you'll do singular. So do you like that convention, or does it, I guess I don't know.
No, because I'm thinking like having a road with several options and you have left or right to go. So you have speakers, and then if you go deeper, you have speaker by ID, and that's the convention. And then I don't know if you have something like talks, because I also have this talks. You'll know that you'll obtain all the talks for the speaker with ID 1.
I like it. I'm sold.
And if you need to go deeper, it will just follow the same convention.
Yeah, I like it. I'm definitely going to start doing that from now on. So thank you for that.
And this way, it's kind of obvious that the talks are related to the things that are before. So the talks are related to the entity in front of it.
So out of curiosity, would your talks, if you were to get that far into talks, would talks also have an options endpoint that it defines?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I must admit that in practice, I never implemented explicitly this, but I know the web API allows it, so we might as well use it. So what will happen when you do an options request? Thankfully, you'll get here. A header will be added and a response will come back. And the response is like nobody, but you'll have this allow header. And you see there, Postman is very helpful on this because it gives you information about the things that you're watching. And allow header says that, hey, these are the methods that are supported for this resource. If you're doing something else, like an HTTP delete, you should return a 405 status code, which means method not allowed.
So going a little bit back to the hierarchical nature of how you're defining your routes, what exactly is driving that, or in terms of how you model this in your database? Is the database the one that drives the hierarchy and the structure of your routes, or do your routes then sort of influence what your database looks like?
The database is the database. You need to structure your data in a way that makes sense, that are normalized and so on. It doesn't matter what you have in the database, but what you're exposing through your API are representations of the resources. It doesn't necessarily map to tables. You can have a subset from different tables. You can have aggregation, joins, and whatever. But the endpoints is, to my opinion, you should map your endpoints to have meaning to your domain. For example, I have speakers, which has a super easy route, API controller, and the controller is named speakers. So I will have something API speakers. It's super easy. But when it comes to talks, it's up to you how you want to expose this. The convention in Web API is the same, API controller name. But if you want something different, you need to add something different as a pattern to your route. And I said, hey, I wanted to have endpoints to represent talks that looks like this. I need to have a speaker in front, my speaker ID, and I also want to call talks. And this is the only way you can reach to a talk through a speaker. Maybe this is the domain that...
I think that makes sense. I like the way that's architected. I like the way it's laid out. The route template makes sense. Out of curiosity, so you have these kind of curly braces around speaker ID, and I just want to make sure all of our viewers are clear on what that is and how it's used in the context of this controller.
So if I go deeper, you'll see here that I have a speaker ID in the actions as a parameter. So it's like a normal route. This is the placeholder for something in the route that needs to be called speaker ID. And also in the actions, you need to have this as with the same name as the parameter in order for the model binding to work. And now, whenever I have something that maps this route, generic, it will enter here depending on if I use the HTTP GET or if I use a post or something else. But this will be mapped from the route.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense. And then you can dive into an individual talk if you have that.
Exactly. But you still need to have the speaker ID as a parameter in the action.
So essentially what you're saying is, since that route is at the top level, that in the template, you're defining the speaker ID. That is essentially the first parameter then out of all of your endpoints on this controller.
Yeah.
Okay. And I did have another question real quick. Could you expand that first one, get talks for speaker? There's one thing that's relevant to a friend of ours, Juan, had asked a question. He says it's not really part of the topic, but he wants to know if you can tell us the best architecture for a REST API project. And that's a loaded question. There's plenty of architectures out there. I think actually Steve Smith maintains some ASP.NET Core docs and like samples on how to architecture REST API. There's many, many opinions, but I did want to call attention to one thing here specifically. In this controller endpoint, there's been this kind of term that's been thrown around in the industry, and that's called, thin controllers or something like that. Fat services, thin controllers. So this is a very, very good example, I believe, in terms of a solid architecture where you have a very clearly defined, simple controller action endpoint where it's logical. There's not much complexity. There's no try catches. You have a service in the context of your controller. And you walk up to the repository, you see if the speaker exists. If not, you clearly return the not found, which is the status code 404. Otherwise, you get the talks for them and you return, and then you just return it using Mapper. So I think this is a beautiful example of what I would consider to be a good architecture to follow.
If I'm allowed, my advice would be not to have heavy logic on the controllers. There is the thin controller, as you said, but you are allowed to call services or repositories or whatever that contain heavy logic. But inside the top level in the controller should be something like, hey, if you're not finding this, return this status code. If this is a good request, return this, and so on. It's more about what the client should expect back. If everything goes well, 200 okay. If that entity is not found, then return not found, the appropriate status codes. And in terms of logic and everything, that should be somewhere else, deep down in the hierarchy, inside your architecture. There are some people that are using mediator and everything, but I so far for web APIs and REST, simple demos, I prefer the repository service and so on, because it's easier to understand and to demo.
Yep. Again, it goes back to having the right tool for the right job, and
exactly, yeah.
And developer group consensus, right? If you're working with a group of developers who prefer the mediator pattern over the repository service tier, you know, it's just a matter of opinion. But there's lots of things out there. There's lots of documentation on that. There was another question here. They're asking specifically about these not being async, and that's one of the common things with any type of IO bound work, right? In this case, network IO. You would typically want, or like go into a repository so you can infer that's a database. So there's IO bound operations. Typically, it would be best practice to have that async and await. And I think this is, you can tell us, was that by design here?
Yeah, it was by design because I wanted to focus on REST and representations of resources than keywords like await, async, and so on. I think those were distracting for the task at hand.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
And also, there's another thing that I wanted to mention. Usually, developers do something like that. For posts, if mother state is not valid, blah, 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 then it's a bad request. And it's tedious. And every post request, you need to write something like that. And it's somehow redundant. And if you do a post, and let me see if I have a post somewhere up here because I tested it. Post. Let's see. Okay, so rewinding. So options will get back something in the header that the client will be able to inspect regarding what operations are allowed there. Let's see, where is the post? I'm not finding a post. Why I do not have a post?
Somewhere in the middle there, the yellow color.
Yellow. Woo! Thank you. Okay, so by default, everyone chooses and says, okay, if something is not good in terms of validation, you should return, let's see, 200 created. You should return a bad request. But that is not often the case because you can configure a web API to return something else. And you should go in startup and add something like this. Maybe you can return 422. That means unprocessable entity instead of a bad request. Because a bad request, in my opinion, should be the thing that makes a request non-structurally correct.
Like if you've got a header that doesn't match something in the payload, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you have a field that has, I don't know, 1,000 characters instead of 2 that you require. It's not necessarily a bad request. You have everything, the request is well formed, but you have a business rule that says, hey, you shouldn't do this.
So I think what you're driving at here is that there are status codes that are more granular than just like the broad strokes that everybody always uses.
Oh yeah.
And to clarify, the status codes here is something that's already built in. It's not something that you went and implemented to match.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. So you in Web API, you have this on add controllers, you have configure API behavior, and you can configure the response factory to return something that you want when something happens. For example, you can return an unprocessable entities with a specific format for the response. And this way you can say to the client, hey, you have a problem in your request. You can go to this link and see what's the problem that you're causing. And this way, when configuring this, it will return, for example, an application problem.json as a content type, not application JSON. And you have the ability to inject your own type of object result in here, to add things in the response. It's super flexible, but
I like it.
So that application / problem plus JSON content type that you used, is that like a standard convention content type that's out there already, or is this arbitrary? And because this is the first time I've seen this one, so is this something that you made for this particular scenario, or is this like something that everybody that people in the know like you have been using and I just didn't know?
I've been using this for a while. Problem JSON, it's standard. It's a common response type that is trying to formalize the format of the response when something bad is happening. In terms of, okay, you do not send a message, simple message, there is a problem with the request, and that's it. send a specific format of the request, like a type, a title, a status code in the response, details, and whatever in there. And in this matter, I'm going to try to do a request. I think I deleted my post. No, this is one. So here it is. If I try to post something that is not valid, I configure to return 422, which means unprocessable entity. And the format that I got back in the body is something like this. Hey, one or more validation errors occur. See the error's properties. Here is where the error happened, trace IDs, and whatever. And I think this is more, has more details about what happened.
And it's uniform too. So that's another thing. So it becomes this pattern. This is beautiful, by the way. This is awesome. I've got two questions. One, is there any way you can share the source code for this? Is it up on GitHub? Okay, there's people asking about that. And then two, is this something that you believe like all REST API endpoints should have? Is this type of kind of generic catch-all uniform error response type pattern?
Yes, and because I really believe that once you start implementing a client app in Vue.js or whatever JavaScript framework, that client should expect pretty much the same response as the format in terms of the format to be able to understand where should it look in the response. Okay, if I want to show the details of the error, then you should go in the response body and search for detail. And there is where the message will be.
I'm learning so much. I love this. This is great. This is so awesome.
Yeah, and I think this highlights also the point you made earlier, right? Where it's the server the one that's driving. It's literally hand-holding, right? Whoever's making those requests and pointing like, hey, here's where your errors are. So this is really neat.
And once you configure this API behavior, there will be absolutely no need to do those kind of validation. Where is it? In talks. If model state is valid, you can delete this altogether and the error validation will be the same, depending on your resource.
Right. That's awesome. I love that. Could you go back to where you had that application/problem JSON?
And startup.
Yeah.
Here?
So if you hover over content types, I'm curious what that type is real quick there. In that, it's a collection.
It's a collection.
So I wanted to just share this with our viewers. This is actually it's a C#6 feature, I believe, where you're able to basically declare that you're instantiating and adding all at the same time to this collection. So when you say return new unprocessable entity object result, given those problem details, that content types collection is actually instantiated, and then you're adding a new value to that collection all in a single line there. So that's a newer, not newer, but it's been around, and it's actually something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. So thank you for using that in your code. That's awesome.
Where were we? I wanted to. I have so many in my head.
There's so much. We should definitely do a follow-up. We should go even deeper next time. We have so many people. There's so much engagement. This has been a great episode. We've got Light South saying, I'm a second-year student, and this stuff is kind of overwhelming. Yeah, there's a lot to process here. So go back and watch it multiple times and share with your friends. But yeah, this is great. People are saying +1 for a follow-up. Great set of examples, very well organized. This is awesome. And I'm going to share this with everyone. When Irina first joined in our little lobby here, she said that she was so nervous. So please give her a warm welcome and make her feel, more at ease. And you're doing amazing. This is awesome conversation. This is great.
I'm blushing right now. I don't know if it's visible,
but yeah, I don't know where to go next. I was going to ask one question about the status codes objects. Is that standard, that status codes .status 422, or is that your own class?
That's something that is in the platform. There is status codes, and you have a bunch of them.
Is 418 in there?
Yeah, it should be because I've seen it in previous projects. Yes, I am a teapot.
I'm a teapot. I love it. Oh, I didn't know that. That's like the best.
Well, and our friend out in Twitchland, Chris, who asked if my home automation system returns a 418. It doesn't, but now I have like on my bucket list, I'm going to have to build a device that responds at some point with 418. It's just going to have to happen.
Lots of love pouring in here from the community.
Thank you for that.
One of the things I had a question. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to ask if what do you think about versioning REST APIs?
That's actually where my question was going because I think you had the V1 DTO.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, how are you handling the versioning and changes to your model, right? In this particular application.
It depends because a lot of developers are coding their APIs like with V1, and that V1 stays there forever and ever. It's V1. And actually, .NET allows a lot of easy changes because how you name your controller inside your app, it doesn't matter, but it matters what you expose to the outside world. And let's see, because there are a lot of things related to versioning. I also have a different branch for this. I implemented versioning, and I will undo everything. But I don't think if you have time, we have time.
Well, I was gonna ask. We've got 4 minutes or so. I was gonna ask real quick before we forget. I want to throw this in chat. Is there any way you could grab the GitHub URL for this? There's lots of engagement there. I want to paste it in chat so everyone can just copy and paste that real quick.
Yes. So I have my GitHub.
Also, while you're pulling that up, I'm going to share with our viewers that we just set a record for our show. This is the first time ever that we've had over 300 viewers live. So thank you all so much. It's amazing. Best show ever. Best show ever. Just saying.
It's all Irina. We have to have Irina come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we just scratched the surface here. There's tons that we we really go into. So yeah, and I think the community wants a follow-up as well. So that's great.
So I will paste this here. There are branches to that GitHub repo, each of them covering different things.
And viewers, you should see that in the chat now, so that you can copy and paste that. That is the conference-main on her GitHub. Go learn and adapt and follow this. I think it's great.
So with versioning, there is a package that you can install from NuGet, and it will force you, depending on how you configure it, to have in headers a specific version, or if you do not have one, to default to a specific version. And it's super easy to configure, but it's a lot to talk only about versioning.
We'll have to do another episode on the versioning, and what I want to hear is how, like this package that you were just talking about, how that compares to something like what do we call that service that we have in Azure? API.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't even remember what it's called. I'm blanking. But yeah, there is a service that we have that is for versioning APIs, right? I'd be interested in knowing how like this approach compares to a service like that.
You're referring to API management?
Yes,
I was gonna say management, but it seemed too obvious. That's
no.
Okay.
I mean Microsoft naming schemes.
Version 3. No.
Oh. So it's still the API management will be in front of your API, and in the end, it's what you do inside your API and how you force versioning will do the trick, even behind an API management tool, or even Azure or not. But you need to know when to version and how to version. And fortunately, Web API has a lot of functionalities that are overlooked, but are making things very easy if you want to focus on a specific thing. But as Luis said, we just scratched the surface. There are a lot of things around REST.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely have to schedule a future show with you to come back and share some more versioning HTTP stuff. And this has been absolutely amazing. We've got roughly a few seconds, a minute or so left. Is there any closing thoughts you'd like to share? Anything for our audience viewers?
Thank you for being here and watching us. I hope you learned something useful. And bear in mind, doing a web API, an API that returns JSON, it's not implicit with doing REST API.
Awesome. Awesome. Very well said. Thank you again so much. Thank you again for your time. I know it's now 8 p.m. by you in Romania. So good evening. Thank you to all of our guests. And until next time.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.